to talk with, all by myself. No one to walk with, but I'm happy on the shelf. Ain't misbehaving, saving my love for you.
Hello, and welcome to Roz's Random Ramblings. I'm Roz, this is episode 5, and today's question is, where do cookies come from? And a second related question is, why are they spelled with an IE at the end? Lengthy aside right from the top here, I have a personal interest in cookies because, among my many hobbies that keep me sane, is baking, and one of my favorite things to bake is cookies. Also eat, but that's another issue. I lived in Iowa for almost a decade and entered a bunch of my baking in the Iowa State Fair one year. The only thing that placed were my unfrosted sugar cookies, which came in third. They really are very good. I used to give them to friends with a container of frosting on the side to use as a dip, until one friend asked me to stop because they're apparently addictive. I also entered my chocolate chip cookies in the Medicine Hat Stampede Baking Competition, Medicine Hat, Alberta being where I live. My cookies placed second in Medicine Hat, but that's considerably less impressive because there were probably like 3 people entered. I don't know, but it's not as big as the Iowa State Fair, that's for sure. I made the claim at the end of the previous episode that everyone loves cookies. And so many kinds of cookies are available in the world, almost everyone can find something they like. It doesn't matter whether you're on a special diet, have allergies, or vegetarian, vegan, whatever your food favorites might be. If you Google meat cookie, you'll even find something there, just in case your diet involves refusing to eat anything with no meat. It seems pretty clear that cookies play an important role in our lives. And yet, where do they come from? It's a fair question. I mean, in North American English, we call them cookies, but in Britain and France, they're biscuits, and in German, they're Plätzchen, Danish Schmeckhage, Czech Suschenka, Chinese Pinkan, Persian Koluche, and you get the idea. You don't need me to badly pronounce foreign words. All of those words come from different places. Where to start? Well, since the British today call them biscuits, let's begin there. Biscuit comes from Latin panis biscoctus and literally means twice-baked bread, suggesting that whatever it was baked twice. But you might notice that the Latin term also sounds a lot like biscotti. Biscoctus, biscotti, biscuit, and lo and behold, all come from the same Latin origin, which refers to the process of cooking a larger loaf or cake, the panis, cutting it into smaller slices, and then baking those again. Twice-baked bread. Kind of like making toast, but baking it in an oven instead of toasting under a broiler, so not. That wasn't helpful. The original point of doing this twice baking process was not about making little snacks to dip in your latte, but about preservation, which is something that is often mentioned in reference to cookies, but probably not something we consider much today. Twice baking the cake slices removed the moisture so they were easier to take along on road trips that could last for months. In fact, Pliny the Elder apparently believed biscoctus could last for centuries, though I'm not sure who would eat a 100-year-old biscotti. Then again, Pliny died trying to rescue his friends from Mount Vesuvius, so clearly he was a risk taker. Another wacky personal aside, my mom used to do tons of Christmas baking when my siblings and I were kids, especially cookies. But my brothers were rather well known to eat them as fast as my mom could bake them. She would store the cookies in garbage bags in the freezer, not to preserve them, but in an effort to slow my brothers down. Did it work? No. They would literally just stick their heads in the garbage bags in the freezer and eat the cookies. I guess you don't have to worry about breathing air when you're inhaling cookies. In any case, you really don't need to freeze most cookies, which is why you can keep boxed cookies in the cupboard. So Mom started putting the cookies in plastic containers and hiding them all over the house. But then she'd forget where she put them. We'd sometimes find them months later, and although they looked okay, seemed like a bad idea to eat them. I bet my brothers would have at least tried them though. Them and Pliny the Elder. Okay, so that's one type of cookie, but for us today, biscotti are really a subset of cookies. The main attraction, as it were, would likely be those little round discs that we bake one time, not 2. And while those twice-baked cookies were clearly crunchy, modern cookies run the gamut of textures from crispy to soft. Really, the things we tend to think of as cookies are not like biscotti. Cookies vary in terms of flavor, content, and texture, but not quite so much in shape. I mean, you can have different shaped cookies, obviously, but when most of us picture a cookie in our heads, it's most likely round. And that's because cookie gets its name from the shape, not the food. That probably wasn't deserved. Whatever. As always, a deep dive into word origins is quite revealing, so let's dive on in. As you may have noticed, I like to start with Proto-Indo-European where possible. However, there is no word in PIE for cookie, though there is a word for cooking, which was probably peku, P-E-K with a little raised W after it. That sounds more like English bake than cook, though both words come from pick by different roots. Bake comes pretty directly, but cook comes to English via the Latin word coquere, which becomes coctus in bis coctus from earlier through the magic of Latin conjugation. But if you optimistically thought, aha, cookie must come from cook through Latin coquere, and that also makes it related to biscotti. Solved. Then I have bad news. Apart from the fact that cookies are baked, they have basically nothing to do with Latin coquere. In fact, to understand where cookies come from, we have to go way back in history to ancient Egypt about 4,000 years ago. What? Yeah, I told you they were old. Ancient Egyptians enjoyed small cookies called kak, K-A-H-K, which you may notice sounds kind of like cake, but now you're getting ahead of me, so just listen for a moment before you jump to conclusions. Kak are still made today, and they do have a lot in common with our modern idea of cookies, beginning with the fact that they are sweet, small, and round. Also, like most cookies and biscotti today, they are durable and easy to carry, which makes them great for snacks when you're on those long trade routes. But they also had several differences to what we might think of as cookies. First of all, baking powder wasn't available as a leavening agent until the mid-1800s, so ancient cookies incorporated yeast. Additionally, while sugar has been around for thousands of years, it originated in the South Pacific and didn't make it to Egypt until the 7th century AD, so ancient kak were sweetened with honey. And these two aspects, yeast and honey, help us trace what happened to kak after Egypt and how they moved to different cultures. Things that look and taste like cookies spread throughout Europe and the Middle East, and all were based on the same basic idea as the Egyptian kak. Ancient Rome had honey cakes and sweet pastries called crustula that they shared with their conquered territories. After Rome collapsed, people of the European Dark Ages had similar round foods that weren't quite as sweet and fancy. It was the Dark Ages after all, they were suffering. And these foods went by various names. The Proto-Germanic language had the word kokon, K-O-K-O-N, which changed depending on the language. The Vikings, who spoke Germanic Old Norse, called it kaka. Ugh. Not that kind. Old Norse kaka referred to pretty well any food that was baked and was round. Therefore, kaka could be those round loaves of sourdough bread I buy at the grocery store because they look old-fashioned even though they're terrible for making sandwiches. Or kaka could be buns, cakes, muffins, American biscuits, cookies, probably even donuts would have been called kaka by Vikings. Eventually, the word kaka came to be associated with the sweeter round foods, especially the stuff we call cake, which came from the word kaka, not Egyptian kak. I told you not to jump ahead. Meanwhile, in German, Kokon became Kuchen, which has an association with kak because of the recipe. Thank monks for that. You see, throughout the Dark Ages, monasteries were the one place where knowledge was preserved. You may tend to think that this knowledge was all religious or scientific, but those guys preserved everything that was written down. And in the German monasteries, they started experimenting with some of the ancient recipes they were copying. By the 13th century, the monks were known for making sweet little round honey cake cookies called Lebkuchen. And these Lebkuchen are believed to be the direct descendants of ancient kak. Those monks, always making naughty foods. Last episode it was chartreuse liqueur, this time it's cookies. Quick aside, my mom used to make Lebkuchen for Christmas, and as a kid, I hated it. I have since made it, and I'm not sure if it's because I'm an adult now with a more sophisticated palate, or if my mom's recipe just wasn't very good, but I quite like Lebkuchen now. Back to the cookies. Where are we? We know that Germanic kokon referred to sweet round foods because of the Vikings in Old Norse. We also know that kak is related to kuchen because of German monks making sweet treats from ancient recipes. And one other thing that I haven't mentioned yet is that one of the Proto-Indo-European words for round was kweklo or keklos, which sounds a lot like cake. But is PIE Keklos related to Egyptian kak? This is speculation on my part, but I think it could be. Ancient Egyptian wasn't a Proto-Indo-European language, but the area where Proto-Indo-European originated was on the Egyptian trading routes, so they would likely have seen Egyptian kak and may have even tried them. This leads me to wonder, could PIE have created a word for round food from the Egyptian cookies? Maybe the PIE word keklos referred to round foods, as with kokon, kaka, and cake, based on kak. PIE had several words that generally meant round, so it seems plausible that keklos could have referred to round foods. But again, I'm conjecturing. All we can be certain of is that cookie-like foods were common from ancient times. Fun fact: because cake originally referred to the round shape and not necessarily food, this also explains how we can have cakes of things that aren't food, like soap, tobacco, fertilizer, and uranium, among others. Nowadays, most of these have changed to different descriptions, like soap isn't usually sold as cakes, but as bars. When I searched for soap cake, I got a lot of pictures of soaps that looked like cake and cakes that looked like soap, which shows how far the original meaning has strayed from the shape to the food. And now you're saying, okay, so we have cakes, which actually refers to sweet round foods, but we still don't have cookies. And I respond, yes, but we do have sweet round foods, and cookies definitely fit that description. So how did cake become cookie? Thank the Dutch and their North American settlement, New Netherland. Things take kind of a crazy turn here, but bear with me. New Netherland was a substantial territory that was ruled by the Dutch in what is today known as New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Delaware. The capital city of New Netherland was called New Amsterdam, but today is called New York City. Ever heard of it? New Netherland and its capital were first established in 1614, but were initially ceded to the English in 1664, and finally recognized as a full English colony by 1674, and the capital city was renamed after the Duke of York because he was in charge of taking the land from the Dutch. Most of the Dutch people stuck around and built up businesses, which was smart. Because of its location, New York became a popular starting point for Europeans coming to North America to explore the nation. And one of the things the Dutch in New York became known for was their European baking, including cakes, which were called koeken in Dutch, from that Proto-Germanic word for round sweet things, kokon. Now, going back to ancient times, bakers were in the habit of making test cakes by baking little round discs of cake batter to ensure the quality and flavor of the final product. It's only recently that we recklessly dump everything in the pan and hope for the best. Dutch bakers called those little test cakes koekje, spelled Koekje, which literally meant sweet little round foods. These koekje became popular because they were less expensive than full cakes and made nice little snacks for those men who were getting ready to go out and explore. As with kaak and biscotti, koekje were easy to carry and lasted longer than full-sized cakes. And by now you can tell that cookie comes from Dutch koekje and was just the way everyone who wasn't Dutch pronounced it. So now we know where the name came from, but that still doesn't explain the spelling. You might be thinking, isn't it because of the original Dutch word koekje? Yes, but here's a complication. A few years back, I found an antique cookie press where cookie was spelled C-O-O-K-Y, not I-E, which was a new one for me. And then I dug around a bit and found that these alternate spellings existed side by side, at least for a while. How did that happen? And which one is correct historically? I'm not gonna lie, this took a lot of research and finding an answer was difficult, but here's what I got. The first step was doing something called a corpus analysis. Not a corpse analysis, though corpus and corpse are related. Corpus refers to a large body of texts, which linguists employ to study how language is used. I relied on a couple of historical corpora I know of that go back to 1800 and searched for both spellings of the word cookie to see which was used most and in which decade. My initial findings were that the IE and Y spellings were about even through the 1800s. Then the Y spelling became briefly more popular in the early 1900s, then switched to the IE spelling being more dominant from the 1930s until now. However, within that, the Y spelling did see a resurgence in the 1940s to the 60s, which is when my cookie press was made. These numbers are pretty close to the observations made by Stacy Brooks, who wrote an online article titled C is for Cookie, where cookie is spelled with a Y. Her explanation for the brief resurgence in the mid-20th century was that there was a kind of throwback trend to colonial times. Brooks observed that the original Webster's Dictionary spelled cookie with a Y, and that mid-20th century writers were likely imitating that spelling. This does seem plausible, but doesn't explain why the IE spelling dominates. There are a few other things to keep in mind as well, though. First of all, IE has a history in English of being a suffix that we add to words to make a cutesy kind of version, implying something small. Thus, a cute name for a dog is doggy, with IE at the end, not Y. Others include dearie, oldie, birdie, meanie, roomie, veggie, kitty, ducky, and wheelie. Oh, and how about selfie? Can't forget that one. There are tons of these words out there, and they fit the pattern of adding IE to describe something smaller, like cookie for small cake. One other thing, though, is that it's important to not only look at the frequency of occurrences, the quantitative element, but also the use of those words, the qualitative element. When you start looking at the two spellings in context, you realize that a lot of times, cookie with a Y is referring to a common nickname for women. This nickname was especially popular, guess when? In the 40s to 60s, reaching a peak around 1958. Today, cookie is a less popular nickname and is more commonly spelled with IE. Ultimately, I would say that the IE form is the correct spelling and that the Y spelling is an exception, not a rule, Mr. Webster's best attempts notwithstanding. Phew, that was a lot. So what's the answer to where do cookies come from? The short answer is everywhere. They have an exceptionally long history, dating back to ancient times and traveling all over, possessing their own unique characteristics depending on the place and time. And yet, the core elements remain iconic. Small, round, sweet, and lasting for a long time, until you eat them. Thus, while the English word cookie is actually fairly recent, being about 300 years old, the food has been with us for millennia. And I mostly talked about cookies in Europe and Northern Africa. I didn't get much into the Middle East or Asia, all of which had their own ancient versions of foods we would likely call cookies. And what about indigenous people of the Americas? They had something like cookies as well, though details are hard to come by. What an amazing universal food cookies are! Finally, as for why English cookie is spelled with IE at the end, it appears to be because it sounded more like the Dutch word koekje, but also because it fits the pattern of using the suffix IE to describe little things. Sweet little round things that we love to eat. I don't know about you, but I could go for a snack. Before I do, though, I'll end this episode by saying that next time, I'll be switching my attention to the Far East. I lived in South Korea for a decade, and South Korean culture has become rather popular recently, thanks to K-pop. That's not a topic I know much about, though, so instead, I thought I'd talk about some Korean cuisine and try to answer the question, why is Korean food so spicy? Stay tuned! This has been Roz's Random Ramblings. All research, writing, and production are done by me, Roz Hirsch, because I don't have the money to pay anyone else to do it. And I do enjoy it. The following is a list of songs that were used in this episode and copyright information for them. The opening song was Ain't Misbehavin' by Fats Waller and is off copyright. The remaining music comes from the website epidemicsound.com. These include the following: Happiest Camper on Earth by Stationary Sign, which played in several happy parts. Rule Britannia, arranged by National Anthem Works, which played when I talked about biscuits. Christmas in Rio by Nicholas Gabrielson with Martin Landstrom and his orchestra when I talked about my mom's Christmas baking. Open Fields by Johan Landqvist. Egyptology by Sight of Wonders, which played when I talked about Egypt. Where Do We Go Now by Arvid Svenningsson when I talked about the monks. The Box in the Attic by Martin Landstrom, which played while I was speculating on a connection between PIE and ancient Egyptian in cookies. It sounds weird when I summarize it like that. Bistan by Trabant33 when I talked about New Netherland. And finally, Fields by Franz Gordon, which has become a favorite for me to end on. I put out a new episode every Monday at noon, Mountain Daylight Time, so please check in each week. And as always, thanks for listening.